Now, you talked about the campaigns. Given the background and everything that has transpired since the process leading up to these general elections next year have taken place, many will say they are right to worry that now that there will be open campaigns, I mean, even in the primaries within the parties, which you've addressed earlier, in some instances there was violence, there was intervention by the powers that be on many sides, and other such issues. Now there's going to be open campaigning. What do you expect to see?
Well, now you are going into campaigns. In some states, there are still contentions, and we hope that those who are not on the ballot refrain from campaigning, because we've had some of them say that they are still challenging their exclusion, and so they will go ahead and campaign. This would be illegal because they are not candidates. But as we go in, our hope is that there is an open and free environment for candidates to campaign. That the security services, again back to that subject, know that they have to provide security and support the implementation of the campaigns. Of course, they have a responsibility to provide security and ensure that there are no clashes and so on. And so we expect that the parties will themselves understand the need to avoid confrontation between their supporters. But the police, in acting to ensure that this is the case, must show even-handedness. We cannot afford to go into elections or run through campaigns where institutions of state are used to support or repress one party or the other.
That could be difficult. I say that because there are hundreds of others for the various other offices in the National Assembly, in the state houses of assembly, governorships, and so on. Now, how do you plan a schedule that avoids what you just said, where you may then need security intervention between supporters of all these numerous parties, all trying to campaign in various spaces across the country, where in any case, even before they started campaigning, there were already security challenges in some of those places that had nothing to do with the elections, but which are ongoing as well. That's, I'm just looking at.
Yeah, the campaigns should be managed as a routine administrative issue. That's the point I'm making. So that if you have candidates scheduled to go to a particular location, they should already know that they should notify the security services, not for permission, but for the security services to provide protection and maintain law and order. Now, the security services should not treat the information they have or are receiving from the candidates as a request for permission to campaign.
Which they can then refuse or accept.
Which they can refuse or accept. That's not their role. They don't have those powers. They should create a register of requests or of information that they have received and advise candidates accordingly. And candidates then have a responsibility to ensure that there is no clashes or violence between their supporters. Because at the end of the day, the candidate takes responsibility for orchestrating a breakdown of law and order. So the candidates are not supposed to be irresponsible about this. But it is not for the police, the security services, to exercise a permission rule. No, that's not their job. It's outside of the law. If they seek those powers, they don't have those powers.
Now, let me bring you to something else that is equally important in many quarters, the issue of funding. Now, this has two aspects, and we saw that play out in, for example, the two elections that we spoke about earlier, Osun and in Ekiti. Some will say with varying degrees or with the same degrees. This idea that, okay, fine, we can't compromise the ballot boxes anymore. The introduction of technology may have made that quite difficult. The integrity of INEC, the actions of security services. So what is left is for us to actually induce the voter to do what it is that we want, which is where money comes in. Now, That's happened in those elections. Looking ahead now, INEC has a role in this because INEC is supposed to monitor how much money each party is able to spend on each office and each candidate and so on. But INEC has been candid enough to say, look, yes, we agree that we are supposed to, but we are incapacitated in terms of even staffing to be able to follow through with this. But more importantly, there are loopholes in the law. In that kind of scenario, what then happens?
I think campaign funding is a major issue, and the use of money in elections is a major issue. And every country works to limit the influence of money, because what you really want to see with election is citizens voting, expressing their choice, expressing their preferences in their free volition. Where money circumvents this, then it's not democracy. So INEC has a responsibility to deal with this, but INEC has not set up the machinery to deal with it. Now, if you look at the parties, they find ways constantly to circumvent this. And somebody was beginning to interpret the Electoral Act, which had specified limits that each candidate should spend, and interpreting the Electoral Act to say that a candidate purchasing nomination forms already in very high sums of money is not in violation of the law, because at that stage they are not candidates, they are aspirants. So you see where the gap is. So taking advantage of the gap, a lot of political parties have set very high fees for persons to buy forms even to start out. And that's a major problem. Going beyond that, the Electoral Act also specifies the limits of campaign spending. It puts a cap to it. And so if you're president, you cannot exceed a certain amount in terms of the monies you can spend on your campaign. If you're governor, or you're seeking to be governor, you're seeking to be a senator or House of Reps member or any other legislative seat, even at the State House of Assembly level, you mustn't exceed certain caps. Now, there's nobody who is taking records of this. And that's why we have constantly, from the civil society perspective, and indeed from the perspective of the recommendation of Justice Mohammed Uwais, pushed for the creation of an electoral offences commission. Now that commission, and I'm not talking of electoral offences tribunal because we don't agree with that. We think that every offence should go to a regular court. But where this commission exists, it will then be able to document campaign expenses of candidates, of parties. It would operate to also deal with the issues of violence, the issue of who is orchestrating violence, who has committed what offense, who is doing vote buying, who is spending to buy the votes, who is circumventing the electoral process, who is abusing the process. If that commission exists, it then means that people go into elections knowing that they will be responsible for their actions. Today, it's an atmosphere of impunity. Even when the police display people who are arrested buying votes, they go to the police station. There is no machinery to prosecute them. After a couple of days, they are released. And that's the end of the story. The next elections, people know there is no consequence. They go back to the same trade. So you must have a commission that will, with due process, with respect for human rights, begin to look at these issues and hold people to account. The day you bring electoral impunity to a stop in this country, that day I will tell you that we have arrived in terms of democracy.